Professor Shirky, hello.
Hello.
So thank you for joining this for today's interview.
You're very welcome.
As far as I know, you are very experienced in the area of social media.
Right.
So during this interview, I'm gonna ask you some questions about biased news reports and their influence in nowadays high developed online social medias. Okay. So on April 4th, President Donald Trump he launched a missile to Syria as a retaliation to the chemical weapons in that area. So after this, almost all of the mainstream American media they started to praise Trump and says he is presidential. So actually, I find there's a biased standpoint of media in this. So how do you think, what forces are driving the media to do this?
So the force there is nationalism, and that's actually not a social media problem or an American problem. The way nation states are organized, when there is either when one nation attacks another nation or your nation is attacked, support always rallies around the president. So when Trump bombed Syria, but also when Bush attacked Iraq, when his father, George H.W. Bush, attacked Iraq, there is always in wartime or even just times of military action a massive change in public opinion in favorability towards the leader. And the press reflects that. But that's been true long before social media was invented. That's been true since long before the internet was invented. So the issue there is really the way nation states are organized. You are too young to remember this, but in the late 90s, when the United States blew up the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the Balkan War, there was an enormous rallying around the idea of Chinese nationalism, the Chinese nation state. That had nothing to do with the local lives of the people, in the same way that Syria has nothing to do with the local lives of Americans. It's simply any military action causes a population to be more supportive of their leader, even if no other policies have changed.
Oh, so you mean this phenomenon have been exist long before the common existence of internet?
Yes, this phenomenon has been in existence in a way since the 1600s, when the world began to be organized into countries and war began to be waged not by a country on a sort of unincorporated population. Whenever a leader attacks another nation, or whenever a nation is attacked, the local population always feels more positive support for the leader. And so it is certainly the case that this is a bias, but it's not a case that this is a bias caused by social media or anything like that, because it existed not just before social media, but before the internet, before radio, before television. This is part of the world organizing itself in nation states.
So transfer to another type of question. So as you have mentioned once in your TED talk, is that everyone in the internet, they are not anymore a consumer but also producer.
Also a producer, right?
Yes, they can produce news, and I think this can cause to a diversity of opinions on the internet.
Of course,
But due to that, everyone has its personal bias. So actually, they can sometimes cause different versions of single piece of news. So which actually cause the complexity of news, which are truths even harder to be seen. So how do you think the internet? So the internet allow us more easy to see the news because of comprehensive information get, and or it is harder for us to see because different biases?
I would say both. That's a really interesting question. It is much easier to get the news today, by far. I could spend an entire day doing nothing but reading news about Sri Lanka, right? If I just picked a country and I said, tell me the news, I could spend an entire work day reading only about Sri Lanka and I wouldn't be done, right? When I was growing up, if they mentioned Sri Lanka once every 100 days in the newspaper, that was all I got to see, right? So finding the news is much, much easier. But also, as you say, and the side effect of production is massive, really unprecedented increase in the diversity of available opinions. We've had other media revolutions that have somewhat increased the diversity of available opinions, but nothing like this. Nothing where literally everyone who has a phone can also express their opinion. So you said the truth is harder to find. And that really comes down to the question of what do you think the truth is? So if you think there is one real truth and humans can know it, then the internet is a terrible distraction because you have all of this confusion and it makes it harder to see the real truth. If you think that there isn't one real truth, if you think in fact that people's opinions are part of what shapes the world, then the explosion of opinions is better because arguing is better. So in a way, people who think certainty is better dislike the internet, and people who think arguing is better like the internet. But if you could answer the question, is certainty better or is arguing better, you would answer the question, is the internet good or bad? Because what the internet does is it massively increases the amount of arguing in the world. Now, I like arguing. I think arguing is the best thing humans ever thought of. So anything that increases argument is, for me, a positive because more people having more arguments is more good. You see this with the scientific revolution. You see this with political argument. You see this with trial by jury, all of these systems we have for structuring arguments. But if you think, no, there is one truth, we want one certainty that everyone agrees to, then the internet is terrible.
So you mean arguing is good sometimes? And actually on the internet, everyone can join this debate.
Yes.
So we cannot ensure that everyone is rational.
That's right.
Like, so there's used to be a case happened in China. In a remote area, a student in a poor school is bullied by other students. But one is on the internet. It becomes that, and these students who bully these students are the sons and daughters of governors. So this is actually not very true because in that remote area, governors would send these children to that place. So we cannot ensure everybody is trying is saying the truth and.
Do you think everybody who works for Xinhua is saying the truth?
No.
So what's the difference?
So what I mean is here just you cannot ensure the quality of arguments. So sometimes it's meaningless, and sometimes even people they just let out their anger or their dissatisfaction on the internet. So how can we create a better atmosphere on the internet?
So there's really two answers to that question. Right now, Beijing's answer is you create a better atmosphere by making those people be quiet, right? And so you have a mode of censorship, right? And again, I've used this example a lot. We study it in my class, but Under the Dome, the documentary came out about pollution, and there was a huge conversation about it, mostly on WeChat. And after a week of that, when 200 million people had seen the video, and many more were talking about it on WeChat, the government said, we don't like that conversation, we're going to remove it. So that's one way. You say, we'll just take away people's right to talk, and then there will be fewer conversations. The other way is to structure the arguments so that people come to some agreement over time. So if you look at the ways that scientists argue about a scientific experiment, or you look at the way politicians debate about an issue that they have to vote on, what you see is everyone gets to say something. No one owns the debate, and there's some mechanism for coming to an end point. For scientists, it's about an experiment that proves or disproves, or at least provides evidence or disconfirmation. For politics, there's often a vote, and then something either becomes a law or doesn't become a law. In a trial, a judge or a jury says, this is true or that's false. Here's the claim, here's the charge. What we don't have on the internet right now is any way of structuring the argument. So I think rather than shutting down conversations, because in a way, the thing you said, you can't ensure that everyone is rational. There was no way to ensure that everyone who worked in a newspaper was rational either. The thing that characterized newspapers and television wasn't that those were good people and that we're bad people. The amateurs on the internet are bad people. The difference between newspapers and the public is that there's very few newspapers and there's very many of the public. So the increase in diversity that you pointed to is exactly right. But the thing we lack on the internet is a way to structure the argument so that people don't just argue with each other but come to some agreement. And in previous revolutions where more people have gotten to speak in public, it's the structure, whether it's now you get a vote, or now you get to stand up in a meeting and say what you want, or now you publish your opinion. There was some way not just to say what you believe, but to argue with other people who believe different things and to come to some endpoint. If not necessarily an agreement, at least a conclusion. That's what the internet lacks. And that, I think, is the better response. There are a number of people, including in the United States now, a number of liberals who want to take away people's right to speak on the internet on the grounds that they're not rational. Right? The people who voted for Donald Trump, they're clearly not rational. We should stop them believing things that we liberals don't think are true. That strikes me as very dangerous. I don't like environments where one small group tells another large group that they're not allowed to speak, even if I disagree with what the large group has to say. And so I think what the internet needs is ways of having better arguing rather than less arguing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
And this last question is that the blog of father in Israel, he said although there's everyone can publish their ideas and news on the internet, but those news who are high popularity can be seen and can be seen by the public. So in order to gain high popularity, so some people they are not expressing their own opinions, but they are expressing opinion that's
correct. They're seeking the thing to whatever they think. Yeah. This is the huge trouble with what's called the social graph, which is WeChat's list of you know me and I know him and he knows her. Right. The linked population of everybody who uses WeChat or Twitter or Facebook or RunRun is called the social graph. And what the social graph does is it allows people to cluster together in groups, and it makes it easy to amplify some kinds of messages. Probably the most famous global amplification is the Ice Bucket Challenge. People dumped ice buckets. So the Ice Bucket Challenge starts in the United States as a fundraising tool, but in a way it was so well designed as a fun thing to do and show that it spread worldwide, even though the fundraising didn't. So there are people doing the Ice Bucket Challenge in China who don't even know where it started. Like, that was something that spread because of popularity. That has always been a worry. Very serious news magazines in the United States that pick a narrow subject and analyze it, like Foreign Policy magazine, a Foreign Affairs magazine, have subscription bases in the tens of thousands, whereas Time Magazine or Newsweek had, at their height, more than 10 million readers. So, and Time and Newsweek published less serious stuff. So there's always been some tension between popularity and importance. The internet certainly makes that larger. But it's also the case that when there are messages that need to get through, when people figure out how to make them, how to make their importance clear, the messages can now go on channels that are not controlled by anyone. So I just had a student write a paper about the protests in Romania, which exploded because the Romanian government is very corrupt. Romanian media would not have reported on this, but the Romanians themselves were able to. So Hunter is right that there is a popularity contest for attention, but although the stuff that wins is going to be music videos and funny memes, there are still places where you can get a surprisingly large amount of attention for things that were hard to bring people's attention to before.
So this also attributes some things we don't know before, but we can know it more easily. So in the Romanian case,
there were several awful events. There was a horrible nightclub fire, people dying in the hospital from bad disinfectant, and so on. And each one of those things looked like just a terrible thing that happened. But then when people put it together, they realized this is all because of the corruption of the Romanian government. They didn't check the fire department doesn't work well, the medical system doesn't work well, and by gathering those issues together, they could do what the newspaper didn't do. So Hodder is partly disoriented because he was in prison in the time of the change from blogs to social media, and he wants a world, and he did amazing work in that world where a small number of people express their opinion at length. And are discussed more narrowly. Now we have a world where there are tens of millions more people online than when Hodder went into prison. But they're much more organized on social media. And it is harder to create a single piece of content that generates focus. On the other hand, it's also harder to keep anything that people care about out of the public sphere. So that's the trade-off, right? You have more access to information, you have the diversity of views you talked about, but it's harder for any one person to create focus than it used to be.